What about Sligo and the mystical nature of Sligo? I often wonder if Sligo was mystical because Yeats told us it was mystical, or is that why Yeats was so attached to it, because it's mystical in the first place?
Well, I think it was Sligo itself, the actual power of that place as earth magic.
Ben Bulben, Knocknarea, all of these places.
And Harry was mentioning Yeats as a nature mystic, and that was totally evident from very early on. There was also the connection back through the mother, who was really important to him. And in fact, Susan's stories, when they moved back to Ireland when he was 17, they actually lived in Howth, which is where I think he really began to get his blast of nature mysticism. And there's stories that he took the windows out of the attic room he slept in on Balscaddon Road to let the wind blow through, and he slept in the sea caves there, and generally connected in a very powerful way to the earth itself there. And he liked to listen to his mother, who never went to the father's studio in the city. She never left Howth, and she liked to gossip with what he calls the fisher women of Howth. And he was listening to her stories of Sligo there, and he was listening to how she made common drama with the fisher women of Howth, as he calls them. It's interesting that when he wrote the Lake Isle of Innisfree, which was to become his kind of crucifixion as his, most loved poem, his mother had actually had a stroke, and he was very concerned about her sudden loss. You can imagine the loss of speech in a storyteller of her calibre, and I know that affected him deeply when he had moved back to London.
We've been talking about the Lake Isle of Innisfree, and not surprisingly, as part of the 150th birthday celebrations, there's an extensive programme of festivities planned in County Sligo this weekend. One of the key events is an early morning boat trip tomorrow morning, which will be out to the Lake Isle of Innisfree, which inspired the much-loved poem we've been talking about. Now, Evelyn O'Rourke headed northwest to take the boat trip and to find out more.
I will arise and go now, and go to Innisfree, and a small cabin build there of clay and wattles made.
Here is the voice of William Butler Yeats from a BBC recording that the poet made in 1932. This poem eulogises a small island which sits in the middle of Lough Gill, which is mainly situated in County Sligo, but partly in County Leitrim too. My guide for the trip was Martin Enright, president of the Yeats Society, Sligo.
We're standing here at the east end of Lough Gill at Parks Castle on the shore of the lake, not far from Innisfree, it's just across the way from us.
And when I met Martin lakeside, the sun was shining and the birds were in full song.
That's a wren. I'm waiting to hear willow warblers and chiff-chaffs, but I didn't hear them yet.
For many years now, a boat called the Rose Isle of Innisfree has been bringing visitors out onto the lake, and for this visit they'd invited myself and Martin to join them on board.
This is the boat trip run by George McGoldrick out onto the lake, and it's so pleasant to sit on deck and look at the wooded landscape, and then also muse and think on the mythology, the archaeology, the geology of the landscape. Stunning.
While we were waiting for George to crank up the engine on the boat, Martin explained Yeats' Sligo connection to me.
Yeats' mother is Susan Mary Pollexfen. One of her ancestors was William Middleton, who sets up a business in Sligo. And with Susan Mary Pollexfen's father, William Pollexfen, they become the Middleton and Pollexfen shippers, and they set up the Sligo Steam Navigation Company in Sligo. And so young William Yeats and Jack Yeats came to Sligo, I would say, more often by boat than by train.
We know that the landscape had a profound effect on Yeats's writing, but what do we know about the inspiration behind this particular poem?
He talks about seeing a jet of water in a shop in London, and it reminds him of the Sligo landscape. He has this ambition to go off to this remote island. There are probably mythological reasons and old historical reasons in the legends and the lore, but either way we have the beautiful lyric, the Lake Isle of Innisfree.
Then it was time for George to crank up the motor on the boat. Myself and Martin stepped on board and off we went. During the boat trip, Martin pointed out other parts of the Sligo landscape that could be found in Yeats's poems.
In the poem Under Saturn, he mentions his Pollexfen and Middleton relations, and the two last lines say, I am thinking of a child's vow sworn in vain, never to leave that valley his fathers called their home. Written in November 1919, referring to the whole area here, the valley from Knocknarea to Benbulben, Glencar and Drumcliff and Sligo in between. In the following two poems, he's at Lissadell in his mind's eye talking about Countess Markovitz, but then towards break of day, second verse, I thought there is a waterfall upon Benbulben's side that all my childhood counted dear. Were I to travel far and wide, I could not find a thing so dear.
And then, as we made our way to the centre of the lake, we were right beside the island that had inspired the Lake Isle of Innisfree. Just stepping out here now onto the deck. Come through with me there, Martin. Thanks a million. Now here we are, and the Lake Isle of Innisfree itself is over there on the right-hand side. You might describe it to me.
It's difficult to pick it out from here because it merges into the surrounding countryside. The isle itself is just a short distance from the shore.
And it's small, it's very small.
Very, very small, very inconspicuous. But it has these magical associations going way back to the dim discs of time. It's a poem of longing for maybe an unattainable goal, longing for the ideal life, a life free from the cares of the world, the Lake Isle of Innisfree. I will arise and go now, and go to Innisfree, and a small cabin build there of clay and wattles made. 9 bean rows will I have there, a hive for the honey bee, and live alone in the bee loud glade. And I shall have some peace there, for peace comes dropping slow, dropping from the vales of the morning to where the cricket sings, their midnights all a glimmer, and noon a purple glow, and evening full of the linnet's wings. I will arise and go now, for always night and day I hear lake water lapping with low sounds by the shore, while I stand on the roadway or on the pavements grey. I hear it in the deep heart's core.
Martin Enright, the president of the Yeats Society in Sligo, reciting the Lake Isle of Innisfree there. Ending.
Lovely reading, I thought.
Yeah, he did it. And to be doing it on a boat with Evelyn O'Rourke, I suppose, gives us a sort of an added benefit, if you like. You also said, Michael, when we heard the Yeats recitation at the beginning of it, how much you actually love that recording that many people are very scathing about.
I do like it. And he prefaces it, and he said, I went to a devil of a lot of trouble to make this poetry, and I'm going to read it as poetry. And then he belts it out, and there's not much peace in his reading Peace or Silence. I think it's partly he's drawn to the music of the name Innisfree, and he wouldn't have been much of a smallholder, I think. 9 bean rows wouldn't keep you going very long. But it fits into a line of poetry very well.
Harry?
Well, I think many people would probably find Yeats's readings quite declamatory at this point. But I think that's because we have entered a period where the poet is, intended in some way to be indistinguishable from the common man in both dress and manner and approach, whereas Yeats very defiantly distinguished himself.
Is that
from
a good thing or a bad thing?
Maybe it was a necessary thing at a certain point to sort of purify an idiom that had become a bit tired. But certainly in the 1930s, there was a facing off between Yeats, who was very much a high priest, and younger poets, say like Louis MacNeice, who would have seen the poet very differently as a reader of newspapers, as a politically involved person and so on. But when you hear that declamatory note, that is a note of defiance. And it was Seamus Heaney actually who said even the way Yeats dressed was intended as a message to people that he was a poet with a capital P.
Was he being a poet with a capital P or a small p when he wrote the very short poem that you want to share with us, Michael Longley?
I love the simplicity of this. and only a very great artist can be this simple. It uses every syllable and every silence exquisitely, and it's full of a complicated man's tenderness for a simple little creature.
Will you read it for us?
To a squirrel at Kyle-na-no. Come play with me. Why should you run through the shaking tree as though I'd a gun to strike you dead, when all I would do is to scratch your head and let you go?
Michael Longley reading To a Squirrel at Kyle-na-no, and we'll be back with more on this celebration of William Butler Yeats at 150 after this short break.